was conscious on the way to the hospital. He was conscious in the ambulance. He was conscious after they did the surgery.
For decades, the final hours of Tupac Shakur's life have remained wrapped in mystery, speculation, and unanswered questions. Now, that silence has been broken. A nurse who was present at the hospital during Tupac's last moments has finally come forward, revealing chilling details about what truly happened. From the words he spoke near the end to a shocking secret he allegedly shared, the truth paints a far more haunting picture than anyone imagined. Let's break it all down. This is a real story behind Tupac Shakur's final days. Let me set the scene for you. September 7th, 1996 was supposed to be nothing more than a night of celebration. Tupac Shakur, just 25 years old and already one of the most powerful voices hip-hop had ever known, was in Las Vegas soaking in the energy of a huge win. He had just watched Iron Mike Tyson absolutely destroy Bruce Seldon in less than 2 minutes at the MGM Grand Garden Arena. The entire Vegas Strip was electric, buzzing with victory, money, and chaos. But when you're living that kind of street-connected lifestyle, even your biggest moments can turn deadly in a split second. Tupac Amaru Shakur was sitting ringside alongside Death Row Records CEO Marion Suge Knight, watching Tyson do what he always did, end fights fast. The match was so quick that fans barely had time to react before it was over. Some people in the crowd felt cheated. But for Tupac and the Death Row crew, the night was far from finished. The plan was to head over to Club 662, Suge Knight's own venue, where Tupac was expected to make an appearance at a charity event later that night. Everything seemed set. But the streets had different plans, and when street politics collide, nobody walks away untouched till around 8:49 p.m. Pacific Time, as Tupac, Suge, and their entourage moved through the MGM Grand Lobby. One of Death Row's affiliates, Trayvon Trey Lane, spotted someone familiar. That man was Orlando Baby Lane Anderson, a known member of the rival Southside Compton Crips. This wasn't a coincidence, and it definitely wasn't harmless. There was real history here. Earlier that same year, Anderson and several associates were accused of trying to rob Trey Lane at a Foot Locker store. In the streets, that kind of disrespect doesn't fade. It festers. And what happened next would trigger a chain reaction that ultimately cost hip-hop one of its greatest legends. According to multiple eyewitnesses and later confirmed security footage, Tupac walked straight up to Anderson and confronted him, asking if he was from the South, a direct reference to the Southside Crips. Without waiting for a response, Tupac threw the first punch, knocking Anderson to the ground. Almost instantly, Suge Knight and several Death Row members joined in, stomping Anderson in a violent group assault before security rushed in to break it up. What makes this moment even more unsettling is that those close to Tupac later said this behavior felt completely off. Friends and associates described the incident as unusually reckless and uncharacteristic for Pac. Kendrick Wells, someone who knew Tupac personally, later spoke about how strange and ominous the situation felt, almost like something was terribly wrong that night, long before the bullets ever flew.
In that situation, he was never the leader of violence. That's what he was at. And I think that was different. That struck me odd. If he was leading. That shows that he was trying to show somebody who's with him. He's with him. Not who's in the gang, but he's with you.
Wells understood something that many people completely overlooked. This moment wasn't about Tupac trying to play the role of a hardened gangster. It was about loyalty. It was about showing his Death Row family that he stood with them no matter the consequences.
He wasn't a gang member, but he was influenced by being the first to bomb. You know what I'm saying? When somebody came up to him and said, "We got an issue," which they never should have did. Pac was $1 million nigga. Should have never let him nowhere near that.
The beat, though, was eventually broken up by hotel security, but by that point, the damage was already done. Orlando Anderson, battered and humiliated in front of hundreds of witnesses, was escorted away from the scene. But anyone who truly understands how the streets work knew right then and there, this wasn't over. Not even close did I end that world. Respect is everything. And getting disrespected that publicly, especially by someone as famous and influential as Tupac Shakur, almost guarantees one thing: retaliation. The kind that doesn't wait. After the chaos of the MGM Grand, Tupac and the Death Row entourage made their way back to the Luxor Hotel, where they were staying. Once inside, Pac changed out of his orange silk shirt and threw on a green basketball jersey. Around that time, he had what would later be remembered as his final conversation with his fiancée, Kid Ada Jones, in a decision that may have ultimately saved her life. Tupac told Kid Ada to stay behind at the hotel instead of riding with him to Club 662. Looking back now, it raises an unsettling question. Was that a moment of intuition, a gut feeling that something wasn't right? Or was it just coincidence that kept the woman he loved out of harm's way on a night that was about to turn deadly? At approximately 10:50 p.m., Tupac and Suge Knight left the Luxor in a black 1996 BMW 750 Illinois, with Suge behind the wheel and Tupac riding shotgun. They weren't alone. A convoy of nearly 10 vehicles followed close behind, filled with death row personnel, including Tupac's bodyguard, Frank Alexander. That detail becomes extremely important when you look at what happened next. Frank Alexander would later reveal that he was never supposed to be in a separate vehicle that night. In fact, he stated that he was meant to be in the BMW with Tupac. I literally had my hand.
Literally had my hand on the back door, opening the back door. And Pac stopped me and turned and said, "Hey, Frank, here's the keys to Kadada's car. You go drive with the Outlaws, so you would be our designated driver and drive us back after we leave the club tonight."
Alexander would later look back on that moment with chills running down his spine, realizing just how close he had come to being caught in the crossfire himself. The convoy rolled through the neon-soaked streets of Las Vegas, the city glowing around them. Around 11:05 p.m., they were pulled over by Las Vegas Metropolitan Police bike officers for blasting their music too loud and having license plates that weren't clearly visible. The irony of that stop still hits hard. The music shaking the BMW that night came from Tupac's unreleased album The Dawn Illuminati, The 7-Day Theory, songs the world wouldn't hear until after he was gone. The officers didn't issue any citations. They let them go, sending Tupac and Suge back into the Vegas night. What makes that moment even more haunting is what happened next. Just minutes later, photographer Leonard Jefferson snapped what would become known as the last photograph of Tupac Shakur. The image shows Pac sitting in the passenger seat at a red light, smiling. He looks calm, relaxed, completely at peace, utterly unaware that he had less than 10 minutes left to live. At approximately 11:15 p.m. Pacific Time, the BMW was stopped at a red light at the intersection of East Flamingo Road and Koval Lane, directly in front of the Maxim Hotel. Tupac was leaning out the window, talking to two women in the car beside them, inviting them to pull up later at Club 662. It was such a normal moment. Just a young dude flirting at a traffic light, making plans for the rest of the night. Nothing about it felt dangerous. Then everything changed. A white, late-model Cadillac with 4 men inside pulled up on the right side of the BMW. Frank Alexander, riding in the vehicle directly behind Tupac and Suge, saw what happened next with terrifying clarity. The backseat window of the Cadillac rolled down. A shooter leaned out and opened fire, unleashing at least 12 to 13 rounds from a .40 caliber Glock 22 that the gunshots ripped through the night. Tupac was hit 4 times, twice in the chest, with one bullet puncturing his right lung, once in the arm, and once in the thigh. Suge Knight was struck by the bullet fragments or shattered glass, grazing his head. In the chaos, Tupac tried to climb into the backseat to escape the gunfire, but he was struck multiple times before he could move out of the line of fire. The Cadillac sped off down Koval Lane, vanishing into the darkness, leaving behind shattered glass, screams, and a scene pulled straight from a nightmare, despite having a flat tire and being injured himself. Suge Knight made a desperate U-turn and drove nearly a mile toward Las Vegas Boulevard and Harmon Avenue, blowing through red lights in a frantic attempt to get help. When police stopped the vehicle again, they were met with a scene that would haunt them forever. Former Las Vegas police officer Chris Carroll was one of the first to arrive. He repeatedly asked Tupac who had shot him. According to Carroll, Tupac responded with a single word, "You." Carroll later claimed those were Tupac's last words before he lost consciousness. However, others present that night, including Suge Knight and Frank Alexander, never confirmed hearing that response, leaving even Tupac's final conscious moments clouded in mystery and contradiction. As paramedics rushed in and prepared to transport Tupac to the University Medical Center of Southern Nevada, none of them could have known they were stepping into one of the most controversial medical chapters in music history. This wasn't just another shooting victim bleeding in the back of a BMW. This was Tupac Shakur, and the entire world was about to start watching his fight for life The University Medical Center had seen countless trauma cases over the years, but nothing could have prepared its staff for the intensity of what followed. When Tupac was wheeled into the trauma bay that night, suffering from multiple gunshot wounds and massive blood loss, doctors weren't just treating another victim of street violence. They were fighting to save one of the most powerful voices of a generation. Tupac was rushed into emergency surgery that lasted more than 2 hours. The focus was on controlling internal bleeding, especially from the chest wounds. Surgeons worked relentlessly to stabilize him. Outside the hospital, news spread through the hip-hop world like wildfire. Meanwhile, Suge Knight, treated for minor injuries from glass or bullet fragments, was released from the hospital on September 8th, leaving Tupac behind to fight the most important battle of his life early on. There were signs of hope. Kendrick Wells, still connected to Tupac's inner circle, received updates that sounded cautiously optimistic. That optimism wasn't just rumor. According to Suge Knight, Tupac was conscious during the early days and even able to speak that in a 1996 MTV News interview conducted just a week after Tupac's death. Suge described moments that painted Pac as a fighter who refused to give up. During the ride to the hospital, Knight recalled Tupac worrying more about others than himself, even while bleeding from multiple gunshot wounds. That was who Tupac was. But as the days went on, his condition began to deteriorate. Between September 9th and September 12th, Tupac underwent additional surgery, including the removal of his punctured right lung to stop internal bleeding. Doctors eventually made the difficult decision to place him in a medically induced coma after he repeatedly tried to get out of bed, his fighting spirit clashing with his body's desperate need to heal. During those critical days, the hospital became a pilgrimage site. Hip-hop legends, industry insiders, and street figures all came through to pay respects. Even Snoop Dogg, despite his complicated history with Tupac amid the East Coast-West Coast tension, was part of the unfolding atmosphere surrounding the hospital.
Right after I heard Tupac got shot, and I was so weak I damn near fell over, I immediately flew to Vegas, and I walked in the room, and I seen him laid out on the bed with all kind of tubes in him, and his mom came over to me, she grabbed me, she held me up, and she said, "Baby, you got to be strong." And I went sat next to him and was whispering to him, telling him I loved him, and to hold on, and he was going to be okay. And even in that moment, his mom was thinking more about me than herself and showing me how to love strong.
On September 13th, 1996, Tupac Shakur was officially pronounced dead. The cause was respiratory failure and cardiopulmonary arrest resulting from the gunshot wounds he suffered 6 days earlier. He was only 25 years old. But Tupac's story didn't end with his death. In many ways, that's where the most controversial and disputed chapters truly began. In the years that followed, multiple individuals would come forward with their own versions of what allegedly happened inside that hospital room during Tupac's final days. As news of his death spread across the world, the immediate reaction was shock, disbelief, and heartbreak. For those closest to him, the loss was devastating and permanent. As Kendrick Wells later explained, the conflicting stories, unexplained decisions, and lingering unanswered questions will become the fuel for conspiracy theories and heated debates that continue to this day. Conspiracy, betrayal, and the search for truth became inseparable from Tupac's legacy. An autopsy was conducted on the evening of September 13th, and later that same night, Tupac's body was cremated at Davis Mortuary. The speed at which the cremation took place immediately raised eyebrows and would go on to spark countless conspiracy theories, stretching from the streets to the suburbs. According to Suge Knight, Afeni Shakur insisted that Tupac be cremated immediately. However, Knight also claimed that Tupac had previously expressed a desire to be buried instead. That contradiction between what Tupac allegedly wanted and what ultimately happened became one of many unresolved mysteries surrounding his final hours. Adding to the controversy, some members of Tupac's inner circle later claimed they honored him by mixing his ashes into a blunt and smoking it as a final tribute. Suge Knight, who was on probation at the time, stated that he did not take part. Whether this story is literal truth or symbolic exaggeration, it reflects the unconventional and deeply personal ways those closest to Tupac chose to say goodbye to their fallen brother. Yet the most enduring questions